Session where we will talk about how we can combine machine learning with computational fluid dynamics using OpenFOAM and SmartSim. And all of this is basically a result from the data-driven modeling special interest group. And I will provide the link in the chat to this slide set as well when I'm done. So you can also visit these links, so you can gather some information about the special interest group, and you can see we are organizing these periodic hackathons on combining machine learning and CFD in OpenFOAM. That you're welcome to join, and of course we have a Slack workspace that you are very welcome to join. So I will be posting some links in the chat as well to this. And this talk is basically about our, let's say, most recent results, where we worked with HPE, so Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and also Intel recently, to develop the combination of CFD and ML algorithms. So what we generated was basically this OpenFOAM-SmartSim GitHub repo, where we implemented different workflows. We have a fairly recent publication from the previous OpenFOAM workshop in a special issue of Mechanica. And we landed this combination of OpenFOAM and SmartSim into the official kind of release as an OpenFOAM module. So in the 24.6 release of OpenFOAM, you can basically just do a git submodule update and you will get the code from this talk, and then from the talk, from the part of the talk that will be given by Andre Weiner, my colleague, as well. And of course, there's a link to the previous OpenFOAM workshop training, where we also give an overview of the OpenFOAM and SmartSim coupling. So I will keep, let's say, this overview relatively short, as far as possible, just to give you maybe a top level view of let's say the problem that we are trying to solve. It's quite a general problem, and then we will look into the repository, into the module, and work on some examples live. Let's see how that will work, and then we can basically discuss. So let's start. So basically what we are trying to address is how to develop efficient and effective machine learning and CFD algorithms, and they are all about data patterns, right? So you have two components, or maybe multiple components in your entire computational workflow. One component can be a CFD algorithm, another can be one or multiple machine learning models, and they will exchange data, right? So one of the data patterns is relatively straightforward. So you run a bunch of simulations. The simulations generate their data, right? And then you wait until you gather all the data, right? You wait. And then you prepare data, agglomerate data for the training of the model. And you basically then train the model. Here, so this neural network is being used to train a source term that you have to, of course, wait for it to be trained, this source term, and then to be used in some PDE, right? You know, if you want to do this in CFD, and I mean, we could have chosen any part of the PDE, basically some coefficient in the Laplace operator, or some adjustment of the volumetric flux if you are very brave, and so on, right? So that's the basic kind of supervised way of working, right? So you see that there's some workflow involved, and then some barriers, not necessarily MPI barriers at first, just your personal barriers where you are waiting for things to finish and to train and so on. And if you go from there to let's say some parallel simulation implementation, and you just replace the simulations here with some MPI ranks. So now you are within a single simulation. The simulation is running, but alas, it is running on 5,000 MPI ranks. And each of those ranks is generating data, right? And now you might say, well, you know, I'm going to get data incrementally anyway. The network really doesn't maybe care in this case. Doesn't have to be a network, can be some other model. It doesn't really care if it trains on all the data, right? It's actually maybe even better to train on batches for, you know, training efficiency reasons, memory efficiency reasons, and so on. So you don't wait, right? So you don't wait between the left part generation and the training. But then you still have to, of course, train the model before you use it somehow. And of course, this is just a generalization, right? The network being used in a PDE, it can be something else. It can be some more general machine learning model that you can then use to do further post-processing or reduced order modeling. So Andre will say something about this, let's say a version of, let's say a concrete version of this data pattern later on. And then of course you may have really like concurrent algorithms, concurrent workflows in the sense, right? So you have a CFD simulation that can be steady state, or it can be transient, right? That iterates, it just iterates. It can even be some CFD's iteration where you basically have an iteration in the pressure velocity coupling algorithm, right? Or the equation coupling algorithm. It can be some kind of outer iteration that you want to somehow improve with machine learning or do something with it. So if you want to do something with this CFD, let's say algorithm that iterates in some frequency, you would like to deliver some CFD data to the machine learning model, right? So this is this arrow, the transition arrow. This can be like every iteration, every 5 iterations, I don't know. And when you do that, you would not like to wait, because like a CFD simulation, it's going to, as I mentioned, run on mostly on MPI, many ranks. So you don't want to create a bottleneck where, you know, the next MPI rank must wait with proceeding, so to say, with discretization or whatever it's doing before the previous one kind of sent the data to the ML model, right? So you want to have a non-blocking communication here to the other side, and then you would like to obtain the machine learning model, but you don't want to really obtain it before it is trained, right? You want a trained model in the CFD, so you have to wait for the model to be trained. And then you use the model, and then you set some CFD data from ML. It can be input data for solving PDEs. It can be, I don't know, something general. And on the right-hand side, you have, of course, the machine learning iteration. And the machine learning iteration usually matches the CFD iteration, or it matches a batch of CFD iterations. So you basically want to get CFD data. Here is the first question: should I wait? Should I not wait? Do I need all the data? Do I need can I incrementally do this? Then I have to basically also think, okay, should I wait before I start the training? And then I train the model, and as soon as the model is trained, I make the machine learning model available. And now this, you know, send data, make model available. Model is also data. It's just weights and biases, basically, in the network, or other factors, other parameter values in some other model. So it's all data that you want to exchange. And of course, there are hidden complexities here, because this thing is running, as I mentioned, in I don't know, it's using a CPU most likely, right? Or if it's using a GPU, it's using then one GPU, and then the other thing may use one or multiple GPUs for training the model. So how to make it easy to write these kinds of workflows and implement these kinds of data patterns? So Hewlett-Packard Enterprise developed this open source software called SmartSim that makes exactly this task more easy. So how does this work? So you have on the left-hand side OpenFOAM. It can be some other CFD software, but of course we are using OpenFOAM. And this software communicates basically, or the CFD side communicates with a database. And on the right-hand side, you have a machine learning model, and it also communicates to the database. And the database is a Redis database, a highly scalable database that can be really easily scaled, yeah, on HPC systems. And there is one more layer on top of this, like a database, and this is the orchestrator basically, or it's just a Python program that's written in SmartSim that encapsulates an OpenFOAM simulation into some model that is run. It encapsulates the machine learning training into some model in an abstract sense in Python, and it just coordinates these two. Just says, okay, look, run a CFD simulation in a non-blocking mode, run the training in a blocking mode, or whatever you want to do that. It's relatively straightforward to do. So you end up basically with a Python script that coordinates your machine learning and CFD algorithm. Sending and receiving data and coordination is very straightforward. I should have made this word straightforward here bold. And it's also straightforward if you basically want to scale this up to different domain decompositions and multiple GPUs for training and things like this. So that's the benefit of this approach. So also in terms of data that's being exchanged, it's quite standardized. So the data movement is based on moving tensors around, right? So as one would expect when working with machine learning. And what happens under the hood, don't ask me about this, I don't know. We're just the users of the system, but it's quite fancy. And it was really tuned for efficiency. So what can we do with this? So we can basically do online machine learning while the simulation is running. So in this example, you basically have OpenFOAM running on multiple MPI ranks. You basically take primary data, so CFD data from each MPI rank. You can process those data, prepared it on the OpenFOAM on every MPI rank, and just send it to the database as training data. And then the machine learning model attaches to this and does basically its job. And this can be like the simplest possible thing. So you can, either visualize something, which is then really not machine learning, of course, but I just want to have this also as an example. Or you can calculate some deep reinforcement learning rewards, or do all kinds of approximations, whatever. So this is like more like a left to right unidirectional way of working. And another one would be to use a machine learning model to reduce time to solution, where you also use machine learning to let's say improve turbulent effective viscosity in a simulation or something like that. So, and the problem I'm going to show you from the OpenFOAM-SmartSim submodule, now more in detail than before, because we managed to push it strongly further compared to previous OpenFOAM workshop, is the online machine learning mesh motion. So I would like to just approximate mesh motion displacements accurately using machine learning models, which means that on the left-hand side, this iteration I was mentioning is actually a transient iteration in a CFD solver. I have a domain decomposition, basically where you have different MPI ranks being responsible for the different subdomain. Each of them is sending training data to Smart Redis. And then in Python, I'm agglomerating this data, training my mesh motion displacements in the bulk, and then sending this data back to the solver in an online fashion. And of course, this requires some synchronization with the CFD algorithm. So one thing to remember, and this I've emphasized a lot, so it all bases on the fact that under the hood, geometric fields in OpenFOAM are basically kind of like, let's say, extended C arrays. So you can port or interpret basically OpenFOAM fields very easily into tensors, PyTorch or TensorFlow tensors, because basically the field is just a C pointer. Also FE patch fields, so boundary fields as well. So, and that's important to know. So there's no huge overhead in translating data from OpenFOAM for machine learning. And so let's look at this machine learning for mesh motion and how it works. So first, very roughly and quickly on the top level, and then we can go and look at the code. So what's our problem? So this is a simplified, of course, problem. So you have a domain. Of course, the machine learning doesn't care about finite volumes. It's a meshless method, you could call it. So you have a set of points at the boundary that shouldn't move. You have set of points in the middle, this blue cylinder that should move. You see the displacements of the cylindrical points. And we just basically generalize the problem. We say, okay, we have mesh boundary patches. On some of them we use apply displacements, and the idea is to approximate. So using these displacements at the boundary, we want to approximate displacements in the bulk. So why would we do that at all, right? We have Laplacian mesh motion. Basically this Laplacian mesh motion that deforms the mesh by solving a Laplace equation. It is, in a sense, a little bit limited because it will approximately solve the diffusion equation for displacements. And the mesh, if you continue to move it, so to say, or if you move it strongly, may have increasing deteriorating quality depending on how you implement this solution. But even if not, there are other problems. For instance, you would like to keep the mesh quality let's say constant with respect to initial mesh quality near the boundary, in which case you need to play with this diffusion coefficient lambda in such a way that the mesh is not distorted near the boundary. So that's something that requires some thinking and work. Also this approximation or interpolation based mesh motion, right, as an alternative, has been shown to deliver smoother and potentially higher, smoother displacements and higher mesh quality for stronger deformations. And one example is this citation below, where radial basis functions were used. Okay, and then how does this basically work? We, from each MPI rank, we send data to SmartRedis. We basically don't need MPI process boundary data. We don't need empty patches in 2D. So there are some things that you of course, as an OpenFOAM developer, need to be aware of. You don't send data from empty patches, like empty tensors to the database, things like this. But apart from this, this is relatively straightforward. And what we then want to do is to know when our data has arrived, because if you remember these concurrent workflows, at some point, in this case, we need to have all data to train the model. And for this, we just count the data, so to say. We agglomerate the data over patches and then count the data. And when we ask the database, query the database, hey, do you have all data from all patches? Yes, I have. And for this, the API is also very simple. Okay, and then we basically synchronize using this length, so to say, of the aggregation list. And then we know that our machine learning model has received everything that it needs, and then we train. On the other hand side, we of course need to make sure that the CFD simulation notifies the machine learning model that the simulation has stopped, right? So that the end time has been reached. So we also write this to the database and query for it every machine learning iteration. And this is basically the end of the overview. So yeah, let's continue and look at some source code. So how does this basically work? So I will just show you basically what we implemented. So of course you have two sides of the problem. So of course there will be an OpenFOAM side of the problem. And in the OpenFOAM side of the problem, we just implemented a mesh motion solver, right? So in OpenFOAM is modular. So I can maybe increase the font a little bit. So OpenFOAM is modular. So we just took this modularity and say, okay, we need a displacement mesh motion solver. This mesh motion solver becomes then a client to the SmartRedis database and does its job. And usually, of course, if you're in OpenFOAM, you know you have to search for some virtual functions that actually do the work, and then you have to implement those virtual functions. And this is basically what we did. So we just basically implemented the displacement update, and we implemented the solution. And we can now, maybe this will help us. So we can go through the solution procedure. So what we basically have is some boundary field of point displacements that we would like to send to the SmartRedis database. So we get the boundary field, right? We name these fields using the MPI rank. Why? Because I mean, you are writing something into a database, and if every MPI rank writes just the patch name, boundary points, then you will overwrite, right? Because in a database, you associate data with keys, so you need to have a unique key per boundary. And since every MPI rank will have a piece of the boundary, you would like them to be able to write at the same time, right? And also in a non-blocking mode. And then you have some small details like, okay, look, if you are an empty boundary patch or if you're a processor boundary patch, don't do anything. Otherwise, you just basically send the data to the database. So as you see, it's just like adding a tensor to a data set and then placing this data set into the database is just a couple of lines of code in OpenFOAM to do that. It's relatively simple. And then what we do is, of course, we now check the key if the model has been updated. So this tells us if the machine learning side has finished with training. And if not, yeah, after some polling time, right, that's realistic, then we result in fatal error because something has gone wrong with the training. Otherwise, we now have the model. And what we then basically do is we prepare the internal points for forward inference, right? So now we would like to, at every internal point of the mesh, we would like to evaluate the model. So this is a little bit of ordering of OpenFOAM data, so to say, the way that we can efficiently do that. So as I mentioned, so since the last workshop, we moved on a little bit and made this more efficient on the OpenFOAM side. So there's just some addressing being done here. Nothing complicated. If you read the comments, it's going to be relatively clear, but here is just the detail. And yeah, then we have the internal fields basically. Yeah, that's basically it. Once we have the internal fields that we would like to evaluate our displacements at in the database, we run the model. The model execution is going to be governed by this Redis AI, so it's going to run within the database fast. This gives us our output that we then fetch from the database and just assign our new displacements in OpenFOAM. So you see, it's a data pattern, right? So who gets what, when is what trained, and so on. And this is it. And the idea is, of course, once if we are done, we have to say we have to delete the model updated flag because we are moving to the next time step or the next CFD iteration, and that's practically it. So that's the OpenFOAM side, just the part of mesh motion in OpenFOAM, and on the Python side, something changes, like compared to 1 second. I can go to tutorial now to run mesh motion, wing motion, and what changes on the I can maybe move it above, so like this. Okay, so what changes on the OpenFOAM side is basically instead of just having one simulation case where you just run something from OpenFOAM, this is now not enough anymore. Yeah, and now you need this Python layer because now OpenFOAM side is trying to talk to the beta database, so something has to start the database, something has to coordinate everything, and this is just a Python script that just starts the database, sets the number of ranks that you want to use, and then just runs an OpenFOAM model. That's it. That's all there is. Runs an OpenFOAM model, which is in our case a simple foam, on a pimple foam, actually, transient pimple foam simulation, and then at the same time runs basically the training. And now you have two concurrent workflows, so the OpenFOAM model and the training, that are running simultaneously at the same time, and they are all communicating data over a database. They are both clients of this database, and that's it. And so what's the idea? Once this kind of thing is implemented, the idea is then when you go to increase the number of MPI ranks, you basically don't have to touch your C++ implementation to get like a scalable workflow, or the Python implementation as well, right? And if you look at the trainer, this is just a classical Python machine learning script or program. We use PyTorch and create some simple MLP, a multi-layer perceptron model, and we just have a training loop. There's still, as you see, of course, a work in progress, so there's still some to-dos, but yeah, that's it. Just basically have a training loop, fetch the data from the database, right? So get the displacements from the database, sort them out, and then split the validation and training data, just classical machine learning stuff. And then you go into the training loop and you just train, and that's it. So once the model has been trained, you put the flag in the database, hey, the model has been trained, and you basically delete these agglomeration lists that tell you if all the data has arrived or not in the database, so that in the next iteration you can check for their lengths. And that's it. And this can be actually even, we program this generally for CFD and machine learning coupling, but specifically for mesh motion, we just recently realized this can be even more simplified. So I don't know how. I think this is like 150 lines of code. I think we can get away with like 100 lines. I think all this sorting of the data sets can be actually, in the special case of mesh motion, can be reduced. And so this we will do in the next version. Okay, so I can try to run this. So when you either get OpenFOAM 24.6 and do a Git submodule up in it and update, you will get the OpenFOAM-SmartSim repo. So you can go into the module subfolder and do it there. I will post a link to the slides later on, and then you can also fetch the GitHub repository. If you like what we are describing, then also give us a star or whatever it is on GitHub. Okay, so the pre-processing. So which problem are we currently solving with this workflow? So we would like to. I just took the tutorial, like the Wing Motion 2D tutorial from OpenFOAM that just applies mesh motion on a 2D airfoil. And so we have to run first the simple foam simulation to get some initial reasonable steady state, and then pimple foam starts from this. So I don't want to run the simple foam thing. I think I ran it last night because it just takes time. So I would just start by, so this is this pre-processing. Pre-processing means mesh the thing, run simple foam on it, and then when we start our training script, at least I think what I did last night, let's see, then we should just start our training loop, basically. And so while this is getting set up, I can already show you what I calculated. So I have some data prepared while this is running. Then we can go into the log files and look how this is working and running. It takes some time, of course. So what are we seeing, right? So we see non-orthogonality, average non-orthogonality. Average because it's a face-centered value, the angle. And then, of course, we average it for the cell so that we can visualize it as a cell-centered field, like this. And what you see here is basically the difference between the non-orthogonal angle, the average, that we get by subtracting the non-orthogonality from the Laplace mesh motion. Sorry, from the Laplace minus the machine learning, right? So whichever model generates high values, right, is worse, which means if we have positive values here, which is what we have, this means that machine learning model has lower non-orthogonality than the Laplace solution. And you see, like, especially, so I can just, maybe I can run it so that you can see. So this is now, what you see is basically the difference in this average non-orthogonality angle every time step that we, or let's say not every time step, but like every right time. Of course, we calculate this difference and we calculate non-orthogonality and we move the mesh every time step, right? Every time step. But we are not writing every time step, of course. And what you see is just with some standard settings, inverse quadratic distance from the patch, the Laplace solution basically generates 35 degrees of non-orthogonality more than the machine learning model. And this machine learning model is just like a trivial MLP with a ReLU activation function. So yeah, we are currently quantifying this and writing this up into a preprint or a paper. So of course, with machine learning, one has to be super careful in terms of colors and absolute accuracy. So this will be more rigorously evaluated in the future, but for the purposes of this training, this is sufficient. And one of the problems is also like that this non-orthogonality is appearing, so high errors are appearing in the boundary layer. So the Laplace term is basically giving worst results in the boundary layer, where you actually need to have better results for non-orthogonality. And so 2 questions from me to you before I wrap it up and we look at how it's running live. And I give the talk away to Andre. 2 questions from me to you before I get questions. Why do we have non-orthogonality jumps between these 2 layers, right? Between the layers in the mesh, it's a refined mesh. And what would be the size, or let's say the magnitude of the diffusion coefficient that we would like to have for the displacements in this immediate cell neighborhood to be exactly the same as the displacements here at the patch, right? So what's the magnitude of the diffusion coefficient if you want to have constant displacements near the patch? 2 interesting questions to think about. Okay, then going back to the workflow, the machine learning model is now training live. The pimple foam simulation is running live. So if we go to, I think we need to go to, mesh motion. So SmartSim generates for us this folder where everything is actually being run. If you go to OpenFOAM model, you will see these log files. And you just see like a normal OpenFOAM. I mean, unless you put some info statements yourself in the displacement or wherever your machine learning part in OpenFOAM, you will just see normal log output. And in the size, in the training app, we will see just basically, so for every time step, we see that the model is training, and it's reaching some relatively small root mean square error for the displacements. And of course, there's some stochastics involved because of the training, backward propagation has some stochastics. So of course, you cannot speak about constant number of epochs, but they are relatively small. And I ran with this simple MLP, at least for this specific case, the computational time is comparable to the Laplace equation solution, which is that was really interesting to see. So it's not just accuracy, it's just the computational time that it's the same. And I'm running this on I think 3.5 gigahertz laptop currently. So I don't know, we are not doing any training on the GPU. Okay, so that's I think all from me basically. I guess then Andre, you can take over and talk more about other algorithms.
Sure, thanks, Tomislav. Let me quickly share my screen. I think you have to stop sharing. Okay. Sharing. Okay. All right. I will continue with a somewhat different application that is, in terms of the workflows that Tomislav explained, a little bit simpler. So here we only use machine learning as a post-processing tool to analyze our fluid flow. And more in particular, the algorithm we are going to use is called a singular value decomposition. So the singular value decomposition, or SVD, is one of the most essential algorithms in data analysis and machine learning, and it forms the basis for many different applications. So, for example, you could use it for dimensionality reduction if you want to turn a high-dimensional interpolation problem into a low-dimensional interpolation problem. And you could also use it, for example, to create reduced order models by projecting your data into reduced spaces where you then do regression, for example. And what I mostly use it for is flow analysis. So you can take a transient flow and you can decompose it into different bits that are somewhat easier to understand. And I'm going to walk you a little bit through this algorithm, which is a partitioned version of the SVD. And then I will show you how it's implemented using OpenFOAM, SmartSim, and a little bit of Python code. All right, so the basis for computing the SVD is something called the data matrix, which is this capital X here. Let me maybe zoom in a little bit. This capital X here, and essentially it's a matrix containing all our snapshots of our fluid flow. So these X1, X2, Xn, those are essentially our fields that we get from the transient CFD simulations, just concatenated into really long vectors. So for example, if we have a simple incompressible flow with pressure and velocity, then we would take the velocity vector and concatenate it into a really long column vector. And then we would also append the pressure, for example. And maybe you want to like scale those fields such that the units are okay. Well, we do that for every time step, and then we arrange them into a data matrix. And this data matrix for like a standard CFD computation can become really large. So let's say we have a mesh with capital M number of cells, right? And we want to save three-dimensional velocity and the pressure. Then basically every column here would have 4 times M entries. And if you have a simulation with 100 million cells, you get a really big matrix that probably does not really fit into memory, and that needs to be processed in a either sequential or parallel manner. And this is exactly what the partitioned SVD does. So in general, the formal definition of the SVD is the following. We take our data matrix X and we factorize it into 3 different matrices. U, sigma, and V transpose. The U matrix will contain spatial structures. The V matrix will contain temporal patterns. And the sigma matrix is a diagonal matrix that contains scaling values. So those scaling values, they will tell you how important a certain column vector is. And what is important to know is that they are sorted. So later on, when we, for example, want to do flow analysis or build a reduced order model, second. Okay. Once we build a reduced order model, we will only, for example, use the first R columns of U, the first R columns of V, and so on, the first R singular values to create a reduced order model. Okay, now, as I mentioned, this data matrix would be really large for a realistic CFD computation. So what you have to do is to to split the computation. And what we implement here is a so-called split and merge algorithm. So the way how it works is that we consider our data matrix as an assembly of many smaller data matrices, which are called here capital X1, capital X2, and whatnot. Okay. What we then do is we perform a single SVD, a single factorization for each one of those individual data matrices. Okay. And this is something you can do sequentially, or you can do it also in parallel. They're completely independent computations. This is where the split happens. Now, of course, you don't get by simply assembling those individual factorizations, you don't get the full original SVD of the global data matrix. There is some merging that has to be done before, and this is what this Y matrix is for. So here we take the individual multiplications of sigma and V transpose. So we do that for every submatrix. We take those two matrices, multiply them, and arrange them into some data matrix Y. So this data matrix is going to be really, really small in comparison to the original data matrix, because it will be essentially, or its size will be determined by the number of subdomains that you have and the number of time steps that you actually want to process. Right? And of course, what I haven't mentioned so far, how do you want to split those, the original data matrix into those individual X1, X2, and XS? In general, you can do that however you want. But of course, in a CFD computation, we have a natural decomposition, and that is, of course, the domain decomposition. So essentially, if you have a simulation running on 100 MPI ranks, we would naturally take 100 of those submatrices, one for each individual MPI rank. Okay, so we form this matrix Y, then we compute the SVD of Y, which is a really cheap step, and then we sample the final SVD of the global data matrix. Okay, and you can do that as denoted here. So sigma and Y are straightforward. Those are simply the respective matrices from the factorization of Y. And to get the left singular values, so this U matrix here, what you do is you take the individual left singular vector matrices. So for example, U1, U2, and UN, and then you multiply them with the respective part of the left singular vectors of the Y matrix. And without going too much into detail, what is important to know is simply that you can again do these individual matrix multiplications one by one. So those are big matrices, or U is a big matrix, but you can process those individual, let's say, MPI rank data step by step or in parallel, however you want, depending on the resources you have available. All right. So this is essentially what we end up with, and what we want to have in the end, the factorization U sigma Y of the global data matrix. And let's now go to the actual repository. So let me zoom in a little bit here. Essentially, first you go into the repository, tutorials, post-processing, and then into the folder OpenFOAM-SmartSim SVD. And here you can fire up a Jupyter Notebook or use Jupyter Lab to open up the notebook. Okay. Then you will go to your web browser. And what you're presented with is this notebook here, which is called Partitioned SVD Cylinder. Okay. We do essentially all the management of the simulation and the handling of the database and the processing. We all manage it from here. So the first step is essentially to create a new experiment, which is simply the SmartSim abstraction to perform computations. You see, I'm going to launch this here locally, but here you would also essentially decide where to run this on which kind of hardware. And of course, you could also create multiple experiments using different hardware resources. We will then create a database for which handles the communication, and we will start the database. The next step is essentially to run this simulation. Now, this looks a little bit like a lot of code, but essentially it's really simple. And the pattern is essentially, let's create some run settings for that tells us how to execute an application. In this case, simply block mesh with some option here. And then we will tell the experiment to basically create a new run. We will start the experiment and wait for it to finish, because we want to wait until block mesh is finished, of course, before we run any other applications. And this is essentially done for all the different utilities that you have to run, to perform the simulation. Essentially, you could also take this piece of code and then, hide it a little bit behind some extraction. Right. The main piece that will actually do the interesting part is, of course, the run of PimpleFOAM. You see it's run on parallel on a certain predefined number of processors. And the interesting part of the PimpleFOAM run is that in the control dict, it has a function object, which is here called fields to SmartRedis, and it's named data to SmartRedis. And what this does is essentially it takes a user-defined field and writes it into the database with a given write frequency. Okay. Now, once the simulation is done, we can actually do the SVD computation. And this split and merging is implemented in this function here called compute partitioned SVD. So what it does is it executes 3 different Python scripts. The first one is called partial SVD. This is where the actual SVD computation happens. And the second one is the computation of the factorization of the Y matrix. Then the final one is one second, where it is. Okay, the final one is essentially to run the reconstruction of the basically to the merging of the individual SVDs. What is a little bit different here from the previous workflow, what I want to point out is the following. So here in the experiment, we created a so-called ensemble. So this is not just a single executor, but basically a copy of the same execution with different arguments. And the arguments that we will pass here in this case is simply the MPI rank. So this mode of execution essentially computes the individual SVDs for the individual CFD domains in separated executions of the script, but all at the same time. As I mentioned before, we could also do this sequentially, for example, if we are short on memory, because we have to keep a lot of data in the memory. All right. Let me maybe go to the partial SVD script. This is essentially the script that is run for every MPI rack individually to compute the individual SVDs. The actual computation is happening down here. So first we assemble the data matrix, which can be done one line in NumPy. Then we compute the SVD, another one-liner, and then we write the individual matrices into the database. And of course, every matrix gets this extension, which is the MPI rank, to make them distinguishable. In the reconstruction step, we do another set of simple computations. So for example, this line 22 here, this is the computation of the global U matrix. And what we also do here is the reconstruction, the low rank reconstruction of the original field, which is happening down here. Okay, so the final thing I want to do is to actually show you how this looks in ParaView. Okay, this is one step I forgot to mention. This is something that is executed at the very end here. So for different ranks, we compute reconstructions, and we execute a tiny little script that simply converts the C arrays in the database back to OpenFOAM fields to make the outcome of the SVD user-friendly for post-processing in ParaView. Of course, if you had like just simple 2D data, you could also do that in Python directly. All right, so let me go quickly back to the terminal. So I'm now here in the cylinder 2D case. And what I will do is to run ParaView. All right, we select decomposed, click on apply. So the fields that you have available here are essentially the reconstructions with different ranks. So let's look at those. So rank 2 essentially means that we reconstruct our entire flow field only based on 2 spatial patterns combined with 2 temporal characteristics temporal patterns. Let's see how this looks like if we just click on play. Let me rescale that you see a little bit more. So what essentially happens here is we have the velocity field building up, and then at some point there will be von Karman vortex street, which you see to start slowly merging here. Okay, now you see this looks a little bit odd. It's like a shaking in y direction and not really like vortices that are shed. And this is of course because we have a low rank approximation. So if I just add 2 more modes, so 2 more of these left singular vectors and right singular vectors, and I let this play again, then you see by superimposing those individual modes, we now get something that looks fairly convincing, like a von Karman vortex street. Okay. So this is something you would do essentially for reduced order modeling. Now, if you go to the last time step, you can also take a look at what those characteristic spatial patterns look like. So for example, here, if I switch to the X component, you see this is essentially more or less like the mean value for the X velocity component. Okay, so this is a little bit boring. If we want to see variance, then you go to the second mode. And again, if you look at the X and Y components, well, if you're familiar with POD, then you will recognize this as a typical vortex shedding pattern. So let me maybe quickly explain you what you see here. Is essentially red and blue areas. They denote correlation between the different cell values. So what I essentially see here is that, for example, when it is red region, the velocity, the X component of the velocity goes up, then at the same time, it will go down here in the blue region. And the same is also true, for example, for the Y component. So if the Y component goes down here, it will go up here, okay? And well, if you reconstruct this, as I have shown before, then what you get by superimposing the background mode and those temporal fluctuations, you get the original flow field. All right, maybe let's look at another mode And you see this is also related to the vortex shedding because we only have one essential phenomenon here. And the modes look pretty similar. They're just shifted a little bit in space. And this creates, by adding this mode in addition, this creates a kind of, convective structure. So something that is convected through the domain. And as we go up the modes, you will see that those spatial patterns, they become small. Typically, they will become smaller and smaller. Maybe not this one, but see this one. Go to, and maybe. Yeah. But, well, as you could see, actually, we only need very few modes to reconstruct something that is fairly close to the original data. And in the notebook, you also find the actual reconstruction error that shows you by taking 15 of those modes, you are well below 5% reconstruction error of the entire sequence of snapshots. All right. I would leave it here and maybe such that we have some time for a few questions.
Hello, Andre. Thank you very much for a very nice talk. This is Martin. Isos. Yeah, I don't know if you can see the room. I have a question regarding the computational efficiency of the partitioned SVD compared to randomized SVD. Or I must admit I did not get if you need to specify the wanted rank of the approximation before. And if you do, then yeah, then my question holds. If you do need to specify the wanted rank before, then did you evaluate it the computational costs required compared to the randomized SVD?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Really good one. So the partitioned SVD I showed here in the notebook, this is like an exact SVD. So essentially, if you have 100 snapshots, you will get 100 different modes if you don't truncate. And in the notebook, if you check out the notebook, you will see that for this simple example, we can also compute the full SVD using the full data matrix, since it's not super large. And you will find that the partition approach gives you the up to round of errors, maybe gives you the exact BMD. So you don't have to decide the rank in advance.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you.